Good morning. Unfortunately, I can't be there with you this morning, but I'm here with you. That's what counts. Okay, so we are still in our series. We're looking at the houses of Judah and Israel, and you'll have to forgive me. This is a little bit of a foreign setup here, so I'm trying to do the best I can. So we're going to get as much help as we can in these messages from archaeology, from there's a subfield, archaeogenetics, genetics, DNA, secular, and modern history. We're going to combine all this. And I realize that a lot of times people, when they come to this subject, there's a lot of questions. So hopefully along the way, I'm going to answer some of them. We know from the Assyrian records and the Bible that the northern kingdom was carried away in multiple waves. The southern kingdom will suffer a different fate, but later. So I want to start by reminding those people who are tuned in who may have not heard the distinction between the house of Israel, which is the northern kingdom, and Judah, which is the southern kingdom. And these are not synonymous. Unfortunately, we're going to see as we get closer and closer into the minutiae of things that this is where people get terribly mixed up. But I want to start by looking at a passage from the book of Hosea, and it's in the first chapter of Hosea. And so Hosea 1, and I'm going to actually be reading from the NIV, although I have my King James in front of me. I'm going to be reading from the NIV. So, Hosea 1, beginning at verse 2, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go take yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness, because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord. So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. She conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. And that name, by the way, Jezreel, means scattered. So then he goes on to say, in that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. Gomer conceived again, gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or horses, or horsemen, but by the Lord their God. And after she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. The Lord said, call him Lo Ami. So Lo Ruhamah, no mercy, Lo Ami, not my people. It says, for you are not my people, and I'm not your God. So that kind of gives you the background for the two houses, scattered, no mercy, and it's very, very clear that this pattern actually is what is going to happen. But lest everybody thinks this is a picture of gloom and doom, if you read the 10th verse, 10 through 12, that's looking to a future time. Yet the Israelites will, like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted, in the place where I said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So it's not all gloom and doom. However, a little bit later in Hosea, we read of something that is the prophecy of the northern kingdom. That is in the 13th chapter. We're going to do a lot of spinning as usual. In the 13th chapter and verse 16, the people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they have rebelled against God. They will fall by the sword, their little ones be dashed to the ground, and their pregnant women ripped open. It's pretty graphic, but basically saying, I've had it. The time for being able to repent and turn around has passed. Now, there's another passage that I'd like us to look at. out of Ezekiel. These kind of all line up to give background, which I think is pretty important. So let me read here. This is a pretty long place to read, so bear with me, and I'm going to try and not look down so much. It's a long way down. So Ezekiel 23, and I'm almost tempted to read it in the King James. It has a little bit of an interesting rhyme to it, but if you have a header in your Bible, in the NIV rather, it says, "Two adulterous sisters. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, there were two women, daughters of the same mother. They became prostitutes in Egypt, engaging in prostitution from their youth. In that land their breasts were fondled and their virgin bosoms were caressed. The older was named Aholah, and her sister was Aholibah. They were mine and gave birth to sons and daughters. Aholah is Samaria, Aholibah is Jerusalem." So you can see now in picture what is being foretold of these two separate houses. And remember, this is the reason why I said it's important to be able to distinguish properly. Otherwise, you can't really understand what's being said. It wouldn't make sense if you didn't have the right understanding of the two separate and distinct households. All right, Aholah engaged in prostitution while she was still mine. She lusted after her lovers, the Assyrians, warriors clothed in blue, governors and commanders, all of them handsome young men, and mounted horsemen. She gave herself as a prostitute to the elite of the Assyrians and defiled herself with the idols of everyone she lusted after. She did not give up the prostitution she began in Egypt when, during her youth, men slept with her, caressed her virgin bosom, and poured out their lust upon her. Therefore, I handed her over to her lovers, the Assyrians, for whom she lusted. They stripped her naked, took away her sons and daughters, killed her with the sword. It's pretty graphic. I think it's even more graphic in the NIV than it is in the King James. She became a byword among women, and punishment was inflicted on her. Her sister Aholibah saw this, yet in her lust and prostitution she was more depraved than her sister. So don't think that one house is better than the other. It just says it right here. She too lusted after the Assyrians, governors and commanders, warriors in full dress, mounted horsemen, and all the young men, handsome young men. I saw that she too defiled herself. Both of them went the same way. But she carried her prostitution still further. She saw men portrayed on a wall, figures of Chaldeans portrayed in red with belts round their waist and flowing turbans on their heads, and all of them looked like Babylonian chariot officers, natives of Chaldea. As soon as she saw them, she lusted after them. She sent messengers to them in Chaldea. Then the Babylonians came to her to the bed of love, and in their lust they defiled her. After she had been defiled by them, she turned away from them in disgust. When she carried on her prostitution openly and exposed her nakedness, I turned away from her in disgust, just as I turned away from her sister. So you have to remember that politically speaking, both kingdoms, if you read the history, you'll find that each not only was so depraved in idol worship and intermarriage and other things, but kings were paying tribute to their enemies. Instead of standing their guard, live free or die, they were paying tribute to their enemies to keep them at bay, which, quite frankly, if you have an army, that kind of looks a little bit cowardly, in my opinion. Let's continue on. So, yet she became more promiscuous as she recalled the days of her youth when she was a prostitute in Egypt. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emissions was like that of horses. So you longed for the lewdness of your youth, when in Egypt your bosom was caressed and your young breast fondled. This is a pretty graphic picture being painted by the prophet Ezekiel. Therefore, Aholibah, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I will stir up your lovers against you, those who turned away from you in disgust. I will bring them against you from every side. The Babylonians and all the Chaldeans and the men of Pekod and Shoa and Koa and all the Assyrians with them, handsome young men, and all them governors and commanders, chariot officers and men of high rank, all mounted on horses. They will come against you with weapons, chariots, wagons, and a throng of people. They will take up positions against you on every side. Doesn't sound very good. With large and small shields and helmets. I will turn you over to them for punishment, and they will punish you according to their standards. I will direct my jealous anger against you, and they will deal with you in fury. They will cut off your noses and your ears, and those of you who are left will fall by the sword. They will take away your sons and your daughters, and those of you who are left will be consumed by fire. They will also strip you of your clothes and take your fine jewelry. So I put a stop to their lewdness and prostitution you began in Egypt. You will not look on these things with longing or remember Egypt anymore. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to hand you over to those you hate, to those that turned away from you in disgust. They will deal with you in hatred and take away everything you have worked for. They will leave you naked and bare, and the shame of your prostitution will be exposed. Your lewdness and promiscuity have brought this upon you, because you lusted after the nations and defiled yourself with their idols. You have gone the way of your sister, so I will put her cup into your hand, and this is what the sovereign Lord says. You will drink your sister's cup, a cup large and deep. It will bring scorn and derision, for it holds so much. It will be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, the cup of ruin and desolation, the cup of your sister Samaria. You will drink it and drain it dry, and you will dash it to pieces and tear your breasts. I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. And if you keep reading the rest of this chapter, it really does give you, as I said, a graphic picture. None of this is just a little slap on the hands. It's basically God saying, I have had enough, I'm going to put it in. And it's repeated, by the way, to the end of the chapter. I will put an end, I will put an end, I will put an end. So it's tragic that God has to be put in this position, but we know that this is the foretelling of of both kingdoms, the fate of both kingdoms. However, we are focusing on the northern kingdom, and we know it was besieged and attacked by Assyrians. We know that Tiglath-Pileser III rose to power in 745 BC. Much of his activities are recorded in the Assyrian records, and to help fill out some of this, I've taken the liberty to kind of blend a little bit of Bible and a little bit of the secular to kind of round this out. So, like I said, he came to power in 745 BC, but the bulk of the deportations of the north, and I say the bulk because there were actually several waves, started about 740. We're only talking right now and focused on the northern kingdom, not any of the other places that the Assyrians may have attacked. So we're looking at a period from 740 to 720 BC. And let's just put it to you this way. We will start following these people. They didn't all go at once, as I said. They weren't all placed in one specific area. So it's a little bit like this. All of these people begin to fade off the pages of the Bible, and right in the general area where they were deposited, another group of people with no history, with no real record behind them, shows up in that same location. We'll call them in different buffer zones, several of them. And this is why when people say, well, how do you know that these are the same people? We have enough evidence, and now with DNA, it really hits home that we can do a lot more specifically to trace the identity of these people. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So 2 Kings, let's turn there. 2 Kings and 15:29. I can't hear your pages turning, so I'm going to assume you're following along as fast as you can. So 2 Kings 15 and beginning at verse 29. In the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel, Beth Mahach, Genoa, Kadesh, and Hazor. He took Gilead and Galilee, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria. Then Hoshea the son of Elah conspired against Pekah son of Remaliah. He attacked and assassinated him, and then succeeded him as king in the 20th year of Jotham son of Uzziah. Now, the reason why I point that out is because that gives us an indicator of, in the days of Pekah, where the first deportees may have been taken. Those areas again, it says Ijon, Abel, Beth Maha, Janoah, Kadesh, and Hazor. If you look at a map in your own time, most of your Bibles have maps, you can see we're talking about a movement that is clearly north and northeast. Then we read again in 2 Kings, just two chapters away, 17:6, 2 Kings 17:6. That says, in the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Assyria, captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala, in Gozan, on the Hebron River, and in the towns of the Medes. So you've got a second area where these people were deposited. And if you keep reading, it really actually gives you the reason in this chapter as to why this all happened. All this took place because the Israelites had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshipped other gods, followed the practices of other nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. These Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. And so if you read the rest of this chapter, it gives you clarity that this wasn't just God saying in one time, hey, I'm angry. This is cumulative. And I always say this, it is well worth your time to go back and to reread basically from the time that Moses is going to deliver them, or actually has them out of Egypt. They are basically begging to go back. They're complaining. There's never a happy medium with these people. So the whole history basically is sinful behavior, complaining, and rebelling against God. So that 2 Kings 17:7 onwards gives a real reason, if you will, for the why. Now, if we go to the secular records, the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser in the British Library states that the tribute of Jehu and the house of Omri. If you know a little bit about the house of the Northern Kingdom's kings, Jehu is an evil king whose dynasty would span 90 years. And we also see Omri in this monument, who appears to be kneeling before the Assyrian king. And why this is important, I'm mentioning this because these are, we'll call them secular evidences. A lot of times people are following these chronicles, if you will, of the lost tribes, and the first thing they say is great conjecture, and there's no history, and we can't back anything up. So I begin by saying the Assyrians were very good to document both in their written record, and of course they love to inscribe in carvings and reliefs. So we have good records of the names of kings that are associated with this period, and some other insight that really kind of brings it home. Let me give you a little background on Omri, and that's kind of important because his name's going to be repeated often. And for someone who doesn't have that many Bible verses attributed to him, it seems strange that we're having to look at somebody who doesn't seem that important, but his name becomes important later on. So Omri was commander-in-chief of the Northern Army under Elah. Elah was assassinated. The news reaches Omri. Omri's men immediately say that he's the new king, but there's only one problem with that. He was not the uncontested king. There was another man by the name of Tibni, and Tibni has his followers. In a nutshell, basically, they put an end to Tibni, and Omri is the undisputed king of the northern kingdom. He ruled for 12 years, established the second longest dynasty, 45 years, his rule and the rule of his offspring. What we do know from the Bible is 12 verses all in all about Omri. 5 of them tell us how he came to power. 7 tell of the length of his reign and how he established Samaria as the capital of the northern kingdom. Now, what's interesting, I told you I'm going to mix a lot of different things here. So if we go to the archaeological evidences, Samaria was excavated in 1908 through 1910, and again in 1931. In that period of time, there have been successive digs after that. But these 2 particular digs confirm that there was indeed a royal citadel at the summit of the hill, enclosed fortifications. There have also been digs at Tirzah and Jezreel that have given more insight into what happened there. We also have an inscription that is dated to 846 BC. That is obviously before the deportations of the House of the North begin to happen, but it's regarding Omri, that Omri had occupied the land of Medeba. This is on the Mesha inscription. You can look this up online, the Mesha inscription or the Mesha stele. Line 7 and 8 on the inscription say Omri had occupied the land of Medeba, which is Moab, and had dwelt there in his time. We also learn from these records that Omri had territory east of Jordan, which would have been the territory of the Reubenite and Gadite tribes. So that is kind of important. But I'm mentioning all this for another reason. On the black obelisk, we see the people of the northern kingdom are referred to as Beit Hunri or Beit Kumri. Like the Hebrew word Beth for house, but Beit, B-I-T, and Humri, a clear reference to Omri. That is, the king may not be that important, but the people at some point are going to be called, these deportees will have many different names. This name, Beit Humri or Beit Kumri, is important because it appears on an inscription identifying these people as having been deported from a certain area. The prophet Micah mentions Omri in Micah 6:16 and says the statutes of Omri, and that would be in contradistinction to the precepts of the Lord. So it's kind of a little dig at saying how evil he was, in contradistinction to if people were following the Lord, 2 different paths there. So we know that at some point these people, the northern kingdom, deportees, become known as Beit Humri, Beit Kumri, Beit Jimri. This will morph into similar sounding names. Most importantly, we have another archaeological piece of evidence called the Beasten Rock I've mentioned before, which gives great clarity to something. Names appearing on the rock inscription are the Saka, Scythians, Sumerians, and Jimri or Omri. We're not quite sure, but Jimri and Omri or Himri and Omri are the same. So the reason for pointing this out is that a lot of people say, oh, these are different people. They are not related or they were not in the same area. But as we trace them, you will see their connections. They are related in some capacity. Then we'll see subgroups. So, for example, I just mentioned from the passage of the Beasten Rock that these names appear. The Assyrian records, though, primarily Tiglath-Pileser III's records, will reference those people. He's calling them the Beit Umri people. Then you've got subgroups bearing the name Saka, which we looked at, sons of Isaac, Saka Suni, will also be known as Saka Scythians, and perhaps, we'll say this, perhaps these people, all of these people, and I need to keep reminding as I go, they will all eventually forget their homeland, they will forget their traditions, And this is exactly what was prophesied, that they'd be scattered, that they would not keep the Mosaic law. There are so many things that are crystal clear about these scattered people. However, we will also see practices that come up that would be very strange if these were just mere barbarians wandering out somewhere in the green pasture. So the references, as I said, different names. The reason for the Saka, we know in Genesis 21:12, for in Isaac thy seed shall be called, or thy seed be called. And there's also another passage in Amos 7:9 that says the high places of Isaac shall be desolate. Now, we're going to start getting into some complicated stuff, and it may seem like a lot to remember. I'm not asking you to remember necessarily, just follow along. It is enough information that will probably require listening a second time. Tamara Talbot, who is recognized as an expert in the study of Scythians in her book entitled Scythians, she says the Scythians did not become a recognizable entity before the 8th century, but by the 7th century, they had established themselves firmly in southern Russia. Now, Assyrian records document the appearance of these particular people on the shores of Lake Urmia near Armenia in the time of Sargon. Sargon's rule is 722 to 705 BC. That is enough time. Remember, I said the first deportees 740 to 720. So that's enough time to settle in that area. The famed Professor George Rawlinson said, the term Scythian or Scythic is not ethnical. The Greeks and Romans used this term to refer to the Indo-European or Turanian races indifferently, and they basically denote nomads dwelling in tents. This is what Ingersoll said, that the name Scythian is derived from Scuth, and we know that word comes straight out of the Hebrew for those temporary booths they moved into, the feast of Sukkoth. They would move out of their houses once a year and live in temporary structures. So we know that that connection definitely, along with the fact that they are labeled as wanderers, makes perfect sense. Here's where it gets a little complicated. The early Scythians were more of a confederation of tribes of different origins, and I'm going to have to clarify this. It'll eventually make sense based on DNA and craniometric evidence, which shows there is a lack of continuity between certain groups, but don't think that they are not all necessarily related by one way or another. I will clarify shortly. Strabo said, the time of the Scythian supremacy in Asia recorded that the Saka, or the Sakai people, occupied Bactria and renamed it Sakacene, located in the place where Armenia sits today. That is me adding that so you can know what we're talking about. The latest archaeological finds show that these people spread out almost uninterrupted, and it's pretty fascinating. It's a corridor that extends, we'll call it, from the Russian steppes and can go in many different directions. And as we'll see, they didn't just go in one particular direction. The Greeks call these people Scythians, and we know that that was more of a collective term, meaning nomads or wanderers, and the Assyrians called them Saka. I just read an interesting study that basically they took the genome of 111 ancient individuals, and you say, well, how would they do that? Very easily, that primary land on the Russian steppes, for example, and as you go up, permafrost, things are nicely preserved, so they could get very good samples of DNA from teeth, nails, and other things to show we're looking actually at two very distinct groups of people when we refer to the Scythians, and I'll go on to explain there actually may be subcategories. So when somebody says, are they all the same people? We're going to untangle this and see if we can make sense of what this all means. Xenophon mentions the Sakians of Asia, that they had suffered severely at the hands of the Assyrians. Pliny states these people were descendants of slaves. Inference there is clear. These people were enslaved in Egypt. And of course, their kingdom was destroyed by the Assyrians. So there's a lot of different references to kind of go back and forth. Here's why some of this might not make sense. Especially if you've ever tried to read a book on these subjects, we're talking about for example, who are these people? Who are the Mitanni? Who are the Hittites? You can get into a lot of confusion because a lot of times people are not clear. So when I refer to the Scythians as being two distinct groups, there will be a group of people that we will be referring to as the Scythians, the sons of Isaac Scythians, and another group which we are going to call the Turanian. They are of Turanian descent, and they would be descending from a line of Japheth. So we know these are two distinct people, but eventually what's going to happen is these people will end up merging. They're going to war, they're going to merge. Usually that would mean children, and now we have kind of a mix of people. Keep mixing the people, and you're going to have a changeover in many things, including linguistically. Okay, in 653, the Medes and the Sumerians allied with the Scythians against the Assyrians. That also makes perfect sense. If they remembered, and this is close enough proximity, we're talking it's not even 100 years since they've been deported. So there may still be a trace memory, at least a vestigial hatred towards the Assyrians. So it makes sense that they would get together and fight against the Assyrians. The Scythians were under the leadership in battle of one named Phraortes. And the name is significant because it is a Hellenized name of Phares. If you remember, one of the twins born to Judah and Tamar. Remember Phares and Zara. And we're going to see a lot of these names and a lot of these tribal names. We're going to find Hellenized or corrupted versions of previously known biblical names. We're also going to encounter another people named Scythian, which actually are their own group of people, the Masagetai, which will be grouped later as Saka Masagetai. There's actually several subcategories for them, and the Sumerians, not Sumerians, Cimmerians or Kimmerians, that may help you distinguish. So what we're dealing with is, as I said, successive deportations that we know started in about 740, the span of 20 years. And we have Scythians not only located around the Black Sea, but these different areas. For example, we have one group of Scythians showing up in the kingdom of Elip. This is to the east of Assyria. These Scythians that were of an area, we'll call it modern-day Iran, were without question those taken away in one of the deportations. Others that we know may have been located in the area, as I said, of the Black Sea. Those may have fled and not have been part of a deportation, because we know that not only did we have people being deported, but we also have groups of people that are either taking shelter in the south. That happened to a few of the people we'll read of, that actually go over into Judah and take refuge there, and some that flee before the Assyrians come, and I'm sure they probably established themselves in their area, in their terrain. So we've got pockets of people. Tamara Rice, again, says that the area that they settled in, present day what would be Azerbaijan, the kingdom of Urartu, was there and had crumbled. So the Scythians under a king Parpetua firmly established themselves in Urartu, where they will set up the capital of Saqqez. There's all these Saqqez, Sakanistan. But what's important here, I just want to make mention of one thing. I just mentioned the king Parpetua. His name will come up in another message. Interestingly enough, his name may actually start with a B and not a P. A lot of Semitic languages, the B and P are interchangeable. And if that is the case, his name would actually be part of a group of names that will look at in future messages that look like the Hebrew word for covenant, berit, but the PRT or the BRT of Perpetua is in his name. We'll see, as I said, a lot of these. Okay, not an accident either that this king in Perpetua in 672 BC, he asks for the hand of Esarhaddon's daughter to make a treaty of alliance. And now you have this, we'll call it commingling once more, and in the strangest way, but a treaty of alliance, which was common. But now you're going to have a commingling once more of two different people, two different, when we come to DNA, they will be called haplogroups. In 624, the Scythians launched an invasion into Asia Minor and Media, and by 612, the last bastion of the Assyrian Empire will crumble, that is Nineveh. And of course, you go back and you read the story of Jonah, who was sent there to preach repentance, and that kept them at bay for a time, but 612 and the kingdom of Nineveh, and the empire for that matter, are no more. In 2 Kings 15:29, it says they were taking to Assyria and the city of Medes, northern Iran. So now we begin to get clarity on the Scythians, who were deportees, subjects of the Assyrian Empire and then the Persian Empire. And we know that these empires eventually fall, and the people would perhaps in between have an opportunity to escape, or waited to know the direction and began to migrate. We're going to see many of these people were eventually Persian speaking, and this will account for some interesting facts we will encounter for sure. But there's much debate on where these people actually come from, and I'll clarify that by saying we will eventually see a group of people known as Aryan or Indo-Aryan coming from the territory of Iran. We will also see these deportees of Beit Humri coming from that area. We're also going to see Saka-Scythian people. So we'll begin to sort out and figure out who went where over time. But it does seem clear that we have good evidence that the Scythians first are in the Russian steppes, and then we begin to see movement. The Assyrian record also has a mention of they're called the Askaska people, coming from Saka. And if you look to words in Ukrainian or Russian, you're going to find some of these words meaning wanderer. They're nestled in there. In other words, we don't escape these words. They're pretty much everywhere we look. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about probably the most renowned event in Scythian history. And it's not so much, these people were known as fierce fighting nomads. But this particular story is kind of interesting because it shows you how all of these different players interface with certain biblical people we've come to know who are recorded in secular history. So this takes place during the campaign of Cyrus. And after this, these people who are going to be engaged in battle will be known as the Saka Paradrya. So now we have subgroups. These are the overseas Saka, or the Saka of the sea. It sounds like tuna fish, right? So when Cyrus took Babylon, he about that time wanted to subjugate the Massagetae. And we have good evidence to believe that the Massagetae are also part of the northern kingdom, and definitely in the field of people related to, again, they're going to take on a Sak name later and be a hyphenated Sak group as well. But at the time, this group of Massagetae were ruled by Queen Tomyris. So Cyrus sends out a bunch of his officials to basically court her under the guise that he wants to marry her. But that's not what he wants at all. basically he wanted to subjugate the Massagetae, and the only way to do that was basically to get to their leader. But here's what happens. The Massagetae are on one side and Cyrus is on the other side of a body of water. And the first idea is, let's build bridges to be able to cross over and bring all of our horses and all of our everything we need to defeat these people in battle. But then the thought process is building a bridge to cross a body of water would take too long. And who knows, these Massagetae people, so labeled for also being nomadic wanderers, although they were living in that particular area, if you were watching somebody build a bridge to cross over onto your land, you probably would fight or flee. So Cyrus sends these men out under the guise to court her and take her as his wife, as Queen Tomyris, but realizes that that's not going to work. She's not going to bite or go for that, and she doesn't. So Cyrus is advised to do this, to basically put out, make their camp, put out the most sumptuous food and banquet full of drink, and then retreat. Because in their mind, there's no question these barbaric people would see the food, see the empty camp, see the drink, they would eat, they would drink, they would get drunk, and then they would be easy pickings. And actually, if you can believe it, they fell for it. The Massagetae see this open camp. They see that there is no one there. They see the food. They begin to eat. They stuff themselves. They see the drink. They begin to drink. Now they are drunk. And you can almost imagine the scene of a bunch of people who have just consumed and drank, and they're sprawled out, and a bloody massacre occurs. Cyrus makes his move, but not all the camp was over there. The tragedy that happens here is Queen Tomyris' son is taken captive by Cyrus' men. He basically pleads to commit suicide. He does not want to die in the hands of the enemy. And of course, the mother's revenge is unmatched. She basically recalculates what she needs to do and turns around and gives the Persian army quite a slaughtering. Basically, she sends a message to Cyrus, which he ignores, but later sends again, challenging him to a second battle in which, in the eyes of the Persians, they were thinking, well, of course, the battle's already won. This is silly, but of course we agree to a rematch. So, well prepared as Queen Tomyris was, she led her army to conquer the Persians, and it's recorded by most writers of antiquity that she killed Cyrus. But what I want to point out, which is rather important, is this battle is kind of a pivotal turning point, because the rest of the enemies of these people look on and say, oh, we don't want to mingle or mess with that. So her clan, called the Massagetae, are also called Saka Tigrahauda. And this is in reference to the fact that they wore pointed caps, and the more senior, the more high-ranking you were, the taller the cap. I guess that's maybe where dunce cap comes from. I don't know. But there's actually an image, a bas-relief of this particular group of people. They look a little strange, but it's worthwhile if you can see some of these items, archaeological finds online. They are really helpful to kind of put life on the history of all this. We can also see something else. Tomyris' name, think of the TMR, Tomyris. We believe that her name is probably a Hellenization of the Hebrew name Tamar, which is biblical. So it's kind of interesting. We'll also encounter from the same Saka group the leader named Saulius, which is just like King Saul. And what I want us today, I want to leave you with this idea, which is very, very clear to me. As we start to see how these groups moved. And I don't want anyone to think that I am, because I'm very clear on the terminology of North and South, these people of the Northern Kingdom will not be identified as Jewish. And these people of the Northern Kingdom will not be identified as anything else except, best place to say this, Gentiles, or what was promised to Abraham, a Gadol Goyim, nations. And it may not seem clear immediately, but what we really see is God's hand when God said, I'm going to scatter these people and we will follow their journeys, and just how far they were scattered. It becomes abundantly clear that the promise of descendants as sand of the sea, as stars in the sky, obviously was made good on. Now, if God can be in control and have his hand in history, and we watch these different groups that are popping up everywhere, and they eventually, not now, but eventually, some of these groups will be heralders of the gospel and will give us clarity when we understand the diversity of people, where they went, what happened to them. It might make sense, and I'll keep repeating this, as to why I said don't be surprised when at the last the house of Judah and the house of Israel become one stick in the hand of God. Don't be surprised at who comes forward to worship at the mount. We often have this stereotypical idea that we know who these people might be, but we don't. We're not judges. We cannot see or tell specifically from the past. I would say equally from the present and nor to the future. So it's imperative that we look at all this information and realize God's hand on history, the unfolding of this history, and perhaps clarity that comes on one other issue. When people talk about this is impossible that these could be people from the lost tribes of Israel. And no, it's not impossible when we begin to examine the, as I said, archaeology, and more there are digs confirming the DNA and the DNA between the earth in the ground and the DNA that we're encountering. We have very clear pictures of who these people were. Now, in many cases, we don't have remains to go by, but where we do, well-preserved remains giving us the DNA or well-preserved digs, we will look at all this evidence and for the next few messages at least, see with great clarity. These indeed are the people identified as the lost tribes, and as we follow their journey, we will also see prophecy uttered initially coming to pass, bringing clarity to God's control, past, present, and future. That's my message.